It was early evening, the bar still half empty, when the men at the next table burst into laughter loud enough to turn heads. They were bragging about how easy it had been to get the former governor's son off with nothing more than community service after he killed my daughter driving drunk. One of them joked that money could buy anything, even a judge's sympathy. I stared into my glass, silent, until they finally left. Then I slid off the stool and walked out, feeling hollow as if I'd swallowed poison. Before we go any further, I'd love to know where in the world you are watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. I love seeing how far this little story can travel. Let's make this space feel a little more connected, no matter how many miles are between us. 6 months earlier, Nathan, the governor's son, had mowed down my little girl in a crosswalk. He fled the scene, leaving her to die alone on the asphalt. Security footage clearly showed his car speeding, but in court the evidence kept unraveling. His high-powered lawyers painted him as a troubled youth who had simply made one mistake, someone deserving of sympathy rather than accountability. The media picked up that narrative and twisted it further. Instead of focusing on the crash, they turned their cameras on me. Headlines and commentators pushed the angle of a neglectful mother, pointing out that my 6-year-old had been walking home alone. What they left out was the truth. We lived directly across the street from the school, and it was a short, familiar walk we'd made countless times. By the time the coverage spread, the story wasn't about his reckless driving anymore. It was about me, recast as the villain, while the governor's family worked the system to shield their own. After the farce of the sentencing, I watched the governor hold a press conference about second chances and redemption. He spoke about how hard this had been on his family, while behind him Nathan smirked, hiding behind designer sunglasses indoors. No one wanted to hear that this wasn't Nathan's first offense. I dug up sealed records, a DUI that vanished, an assault charge dropped, property damage quietly paid off. But every time I tried to speak, people told me I was bitter, that I needed to move on. 3 months after the trial, I was grinding through another long day at my accounting firm when I found a plain envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. Inside was a single sheet of paper with block letters scrawled across it. No signature, no explanation, go to the mall parkade. Level 3. Spot 42 folded with a note was a newspaper clipping, an article about my daughter's death. My hands shook as I read it. Whoever left this knew exactly who I was. I drove to the mall, my heart hammering the whole way. The parkade was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry insects above me. When I reached spot 42, I froze. Taped to the concrete wall at eye level was a manila envelope, my name scrawled across the front in thick black marker. Inside was a USB drive wrapped in bubble wrap. Later that night, I plugged it into my laptop and dozens of files appeared, photos, documents, records, all centered on a 5-year-old girl named Lena. Her birth certificate listed Nathan Johnson as the father. There were hospital records, bank statements showing monthly payments from an offshore account, and photographs of Nathan with a young woman and the child. Among the files was a written account of the mother's story. Her name was Iris Dowdle. She'd been a college student when Nathan got her pregnant. His family had paid for her to disappear, to stay quiet. The monthly payments came with strict conditions. No contact with Nathan, no going public. Iris had moved 3 states away and was raising Lena alone. This wasn't just about a drunk driving cover-up anymore. This was a pattern of a family that solved every problem with hush money and influence. For the first time, I had leverage. But I also knew one wrong move could put Lena and her mother in danger. I spent weeks verifying everything, even flying out of state to observe them from afar. Watching her play at a park while her mother, Iris Dowdle, looked exhausted broke my heart. The anonymous source kept feeding me information through drops, security footage of Nathan visiting the child exactly once, on the day she was born, legal documents showing the non-disclosure agreements, even recordings of lawyers discussing how to keep the situation contained. Then came the most damning files yet, campaign finance records. On the surface, they looked like ordinary donations to Governor Johnson's re-election fund. But the names were wrong. Low-level employees, retirees, even a janitor listed as giving thousands. Straw donors. The money had been funneled through them, then wired straight into the same offshore accounts that funded the hush payments to Iris. Someone close to the family wanted this exposure, but couldn't do it themselves. I decided to confront Nathan directly first. I waited outside his favorite bar until he stumbled out at 2 a.m., heading for his car again. I stepped in front of him, holding printed photos of Lena. His drunk confidence evaporated the instant he recognized what I had. He lunged for the papers, but I'd made copies. Nathan fumbled for his phone and called his father right there in the parking lot, babbling about the photos. I could hear Governor Johnson's voice rising through the speaker, demanding to know who else knew. Nathan kept glancing at me, his bravado gone, genuine fear in his eyes. For the first time he understood, I had something money couldn't make disappear. The next day, the knock at my door rattled the frame. When I opened it, the former governor himself stood there, flanked by 2 lawyers in tailored suits. They didn't wait for an invitation, just brushed past me and set their briefcases on my kitchen table, their presence filling the room like a storm. They didn't start with papers. They started with questions. "What do you know?" one lawyer demanded. "Who told you?" the other pressed. The governor just watched me, his eyes sharp, waiting for me to slip. When I stayed silent, they shifted tactics. A briefcase snapped open, and a stack of contracts slid across my table. Red tabs marked the places I was expected to sign. "Hand over everything," one of them said. "The files, the photos, the recordings. Sign the agreements, and this ends here." They tried every angle, bribes, threats, even appeals to guilt. Millions of dollars dangled in front of me, followed by warnings that going public would ruin Lena's life, that Iris would be dragged through the mud. I pushed the papers back. "I don't want your money," I said. "I want justice for my daughter." For a moment, the room went still. Then the governor laughed. A low, humorless sound that made my skin crawl. "Justice," he said, shaking his head. "Justice is a luxury people like you can't afford." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "If you go public, I'll destroy you. My lawyers already have a strategy. You'll be painted as a bitter, grieving mother chasing conspiracies. No one will believe you." They gathered their papers, leaving the red tabs fluttering like warning flags. At the door, the governor turned back, his smile thin and cruel. "You have 1 week to reconsider." That night, I sat staring at Lena's photos, wondering what my daughter would want me to do. The weight of that choice pressed down on me until I could hardly breathe. In the end, I knew silence wasn't an option. If Nathan Johnson's family could bury the truth in courtrooms and contracts, then I needed someone who couldn't be bought. I reached out to a journalist, Lisa Laflamme. I trusted her. We arranged to meet in a quiet cafe, my files stacked in a plain folder between us. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't carrying this burden alone. 6 days later, we were at my house, sifting through the evidence spread across my kitchen table, when my phone buzzed with a news alert. The former governor was holding a surprise press conference. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the live stream, the screen flickering to life as he stepped up to the podium, with tears in his eyes, his voice breaking as he announced he had just learned about a grandchild he never knew existed. He claimed Nathan had hidden the child from the family out of shame. He painted himself as a victim, a grandfather denied precious years with his granddaughter. Behind him, Nathan stood frozen, lawyers whispering urgently in his ear. The press ate it up, already spinning headlines about reconciliation and forgiveness. But I knew the truth. As cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, I saw her step out from behind the press pool. Iris Dowdle walked straight up to the microphone, holding her daughter's hand. She looked directly at Governor Johnson with a smile that made him step backward. The lawyers were frantically making phone calls, but it was too late. She leaned into the microphone and spoke 7 words that changed everything. "Actually, Governor Johnson, Lena is your daughter." The room exploded. Reporters leapt to their feet, shouting questions, cameras clicking like machine guns, all aimed at Iris, who stood calm and steady with her little girl's hand in hers. The former governor's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his face shifting from red to white in seconds. Behind him, Nathan looked like someone had hit him with a brick. The lawyers whispered furiously, speed-dialing numbers, trying to contain the bomb that had just gone off. Security guards started moving toward Iris, but she stepped closer to the microphone and pulled a folder from her bag. "I have DNA tests proving everything," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "And photos from 5 years ago, when the governor and I were together." The press secretary tried to cut the live feed, but it was too late. Reporters were already streaming on their phones to thousands of viewers. Nothing could stop it now. Then she dropped the final blow. "And let's be clear, the governor has known about Lena all along. He's been paying me for 5 years to stay quiet." The press turned on her instantly, shouting over one another, "Why stay hidden? Why now? Why speak out today?" She didn't flinch. She tightened her grip on Lena's hand and met the storm head-on, her voice steady over the chaos. "Because the truth was never mine to hide. It was hers. My daughter wanted to know her father. And I won't let them bury it anymore." I stood frozen, realizing the anonymous source had orchestrated this entire moment, using me to set the stage for maximum damage. The governor's team scrambled like ants after their hill had been kicked apart, but the story was already out, unstoppable. Lisa LaFlamme said we needed to figure out what to do next, because this was bigger than either of us had expected. Her eyes told me she knew we'd both been played, but there was still a massive story here if we could stay ahead of it. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message. When I opened it, I found screenshots of calendars showing monthly meetings labeled Legacy Review, a thin disguise for hush money payments. Each entry came with meticulous notes, not just about the payouts to Iris, but about every payment ever made to cover up Nathan's arrests. DUIs that vanished, assault charges that evaporated, property damage swept under the rug, all of it tracked, logged, and quietly paid off. The timestamps proved this wasn't sloppy bookkeeping, it was a system. Someone high up in the governor's office had been keeping score, and now those records were in my hands. Then came the real bombshell. Attached were 2 video files, shot with movie-quality clarity. The first showed Governor Johnson in a hotel suite, accepting a thick envelope of cash in exchange for vetoing a bill. The second, filmed in a different hotel room months later, captured him again, this time with executives from a major construction company, taking another payoff to secure a lucrative state contract. I forwarded everything to Lisa, my hands shaking. This wasn't just about a scandal anymore. This was systemic corruption, caught on camera, and whoever was feeding me these files wanted the whole house of cards to crash down. Lisa and I decided to step out for a quick bite, hoping food might clear our heads. We found a quiet corner booth in a diner, the kind of place where the clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation made it easy to blend in. For a moment, it almost felt normal, 2 people sharing fries while trying to untangle a story that was anything but. Halfway through the meal, a man in a courier's uniform walked straight up to our table. He didn't ask for my name, he already knew it. Without a word, he set an envelope down in front of me and left. Inside was a cease and desist letter from the former governor's lawyers. My hands shook as I read it. They'd tracked us here, which meant someone was watching me. The letter was filled with threats of lawsuits, financial ruin, promises to destroy my life if I didn't hand over everything and stay quiet. Lisa calmly pulled out her phone, snapping photos of each page. "We need a lawyer immediately," she said, her voice steady. "This is going to get ugly fast." The food sat untouched between us, the smell of grease and coffee suddenly heavy in the air. Whatever appetite I'd had was gone. Not long after, Lisa's laptop chimed with a new email. It was from Iris Dowdle. She wrote that she was done being a pawn. For 5 years the governor had controlled her life, and now she wanted to take back her story, to cause maximum damage to the man who had silenced her. She said she was ready to meet, but only on her terms, somewhere she felt safe. Lisa typed a careful reply, assuring Iris that she deserved to tell her truth, however she chose, and that she would respect whatever boundaries Iris set. The next morning, I woke up on Rachel Myers's couch, my closest friend from college, the one who'd seen me through exams, heartbreaks, and now this storm. Every news channel was running the story, but the former governor's team was already spinning it as a misunderstanding that needed investigation. The governor released a statement saying he was taking some time away to focus on family matters and to investigate these troubling allegations. Code for damage control. The PR machine was working overtime. Paid experts filled the TV panels, urging the public to wait for the facts before rushing to judgment. Meanwhile, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. When I checked Instagram, my stomach dropped. Someone had posted my home address and workplace, alongside messages calling me a liar out to destroy a good family. The same posts were spreading on X. The threats came fast and ugly, ranging from lawsuits to promises of physical violence. My photo was everywhere, plastered with captions labeling me a bitter conspiracy theorist. I didn't waste time. I threw clothes into a bag, hands shaking, and called Rachel Myers. She didn't hesitate. "Stay here," she said. "As long as you need. We'll figure out the next steps together." Lisa called, saying she'd found a media lawyer willing to help us pro bono because he believed in holding powerful people accountable. We met him at his office, where Michael Harrington laid out exactly what we could and couldn't say without getting sued into oblivion. He had sharp eyes and gray hair, the kind of presence that made you sit up straighter. His voice was calm but firm as he explained that truth was our only defense, and every claim had to be backed by rock-solid proof. Then he went through each piece of evidence methodically, marking what was usable and what could land us in trouble. That night, Rachel helped me overhaul my digital security while I backed up everything to multiple cloud accounts and physical drives, which I hid in different places. I made copies of copies, because I knew they'd try to destroy evidence or claim I'd faked it all. Rachel also insisted we deal with the physical side of things. By the time we were done, I had new locks on the doors, cameras covering every angle of the house, and motion sensors inside and out. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. And the paranoia felt justified, considering the former governor had already tracked me once and his lawyers were preparing to destroy my life through the courts. The next morning, another envelope appeared, taped to Rachel's front door with no return address. Inside were pages of police evidence logs from my daughter's case, records riddled with strange gaps in the chain of custody. The blood test kit, which should have been sealed after processing, had been checked out 3 separate times. Someone had gone back and tampered with the evidence after the fact. The timestamps told the story clearly. It all happened right before the trial, just as the prosecutor suddenly claimed the readings weren't reliable. My hands trembled as I flipped through each page, the truth sinking in. They hadn't just defended Nathan, they'd rigged the entire case from the start. I tried calling the officer who first responded to my daughter's accident, but no matter when I dialed, it went straight to voicemail. Eventually, Rachel and I drove to the police station, hoping for answers but bracing for more silence. The desk sergeant barely looked up before saying Officer Daniels was on extended leave with no return date. When I pressed for details, the other cops avoided my eyes, shifting uncomfortably behind the counter. The silence told me more than their words ever could. Something was deeply wrong with how they'd handled my daughter's case, and everyone there knew it. In her interview, Iris laid out the evidence piece by piece. She produced text messages from the governor himself, messages that made their relationship undeniable. Then came the emails from his staff, carefully worded exchanges arranging payments and logistics to keep her silent. She showed hotel receipts from multiple cities, each one aligning with his campaign stops, proof of their affair documented down to the room number. Finally, she revealed the DNA results she had spoken of before, scientific confirmation of paternity, and a copy of the NDA she had been pressured into signing years earlier. The weight of it was overwhelming. This wasn't rumor or speculation anymore. It was a paper trail, airtight and damning, that stripped away every layer of the governor's carefully crafted image. The pressure didn't stop with threats and surveillance. The next blow came quietly, through my phone. My office manager's name lit up the screen, and the moment I heard his voice I knew something was wrong. He sounded uneasy as he explained that my hours were being cut to almost nothing because of customer complaints. The excuse didn't make sense. I hadn't even been at work for 3 days, so there couldn't have been any real complaints. He kept apologizing, his words stumbling over themselves, but we both knew the truth. Someone had leaned on him. The governor's people had found a new way to squeeze me, attacking my income, trying to make me desperate enough to back off. I needed legal help, so Rachel set up a meeting with Donald Klein, an assistant DA downtown. Donald listened to everything I had, scribbling notes without ever looking up at me. Finally, he admitted he needed rock-solid evidence before taking on the former governor. The political pressure would be enormous, and one mistake could end his career. I understood his caution, but I wanted him to move faster while we still had momentum. That night, I spread everything across Rachel's kitchen table and began mapping it out on a poster board. The drunk driving cover-up connected to the evidence tampering, which tied directly to the NDAs and hush money payments. At the center sat the paternity lie, with arrows radiating outward to every other crime committed to protect it. And then there was the legacy review. Those monthly meetings weren't just about Iris. They documented every payout tied to Nathan's arrests, every time the governor's office stepped in to bury charges or silence victims. The logs showed a pattern of protection and payoff, a system designed to keep Nathan untouchable while shielding the governor from scandal. When I stepped back and looked at the whole web, the picture was undeniable. The corruption wasn't isolated, it was institutional, running through every level of state government like rot beneath polished wood. Meanwhile, Lisa was meeting with her editor, trying to get approval for the story. She kept pushing back, insisting on signed affidavits and multiple sources for every claim. Journalism wasn't about breaking news anymore, it was about being bulletproof when rich people's lawyers came after you. The editor finally agreed to run something if they could verify everything to her standards, which meant more waiting. So Lisa arranged a formal interview with Iris at Michael Harrington's office, where everyone would have legal protection. Iris arrived calm, steady, and ready to finally tell her story the right way. Lisa treated her with respect, which helped build trust. They sat in a polished conference room, a court reporter typing every word while lawyers watched silently from the corners. Iris began by explaining she was 19, volunteering for the former governor's last campaign when he first started paying attention to her. He pursued her with gifts and promises until she believed they were in love. The affair lasted 3 months, until she discovered she was pregnant. That was when everything shifted. The former governor's lawyer showed up at Iris's dorm with papers to sign and thinly veiled threats about what would happen if she didn't cooperate. They pressured her into dating Nathan, even sleeping with him, so they could later name him as the father and protect Governor Johnson's marriage and career. To make the cover story airtight, they paid for her associate degree, framing it as support so long as she kept seeing Nathan and played her part. In one of the texts Iris had, the governor's staff told her to do it quickly, warning that Nathan was slow but not stupid. That line stuck with me. She received monthly payments, but the price was her freedom. She had to disappear, cut ties with her old life, and raise Lena alone. Meanwhile, Governor Johnson went on TV pretending to be a devoted family man. Iris knew about the press conference ahead of time. Someone inside the State House had leaked his schedule. She timed her revelation for maximum impact, choosing the exact moment he tried to spin being a grandfather. She wanted her daughter to know the truth someday, not grow up surrounded by lies about who her father really was. She looked straight into the cameras and said she was done being afraid of what they could do to her. That same night, I drove to the old parking garage at the mall where the anonymous source had left packages before. The third level was empty, just scattered trash and a few abandoned shopping carts. I taped an envelope under the concrete in spot 42, the same place I'd found previous drops. Inside was a simple message: I was done being someone's puppet. I wouldn't cooperate anymore unless they revealed themselves. Trust had to work both ways if we were going to bring down the governor together. I waited in my car for 20 minutes, watching the drop spot. No one came. Back at Rachel's apartment, I couldn't sleep, turning over in my head who might be pulling the strings. The next morning, Rachel woke me holding a small package that had been left on her doorstep while we slept. No return address, no markings, just a padded envelope sealed tight. Inside was a USB drive. On it was a copy of a memo titled Legacy Risk Management, signed by Caroline Vega, the former governor's personal assistant for 15 years. The memo outlined internal protocols for handling sensitive family matters that could threaten political standing. I called Lisa immediately. She came over with her laptop and ran the memo through software that pulled metadata from the file. It showed the document had originated from Caroline Vega's official computer, the same one she'd used as the former governor's personal assistant. The email headers matched the internal server used by the governor's office, and the digital signature was authentic. We weren't just chasing rumors anymore. We had proof that someone at the highest level of the governor's staff had been documenting the corruption from inside. Lisa started building a timeline, comparing the dates when Caroline Vega sent internal memos with the moments I received anonymous leaks. She'd been documenting everything from inside the governor's office, feeding me just enough to keep the trail alive while protecting herself. Meanwhile, Lisa was battling her newspaper's legal team over the draft of her story. They kept editing to strip out anything that could be read as opinion rather than fact. The lawyers wanted every single claim backed up with documents and multiple sources. She told me later she understood they were protecting the paper and everyone involved from defamation suits, but it was frustrating. 2 days later, Lisa arranged another meeting with Iris at Michael Harrington's office. In the conference room, Iris agreed to a new DNA test with Nathan. She wanted everything on record, no ambiguity. The test would determine whether Nathan was the biological father or possibly his brother. Either result would carry weight, and she was ready to face it. Before signing anything, Michael asked her to walk through her life over the past 5 years. Iris didn't flinch. She explained how she'd earned her associate degree in education and worked as a teacher's aide at Brookside Elementary, a small public school in the suburbs. She wasn't chasing fame or money. She had no social media platform to promote, no book deal, no hidden agenda. Her parents, while not wealthy, were comfortable enough to help. They'd bought her a modest house when Lena was born and had committed to paying for her to finish her schooling so she could become a certified teacher. Iris didn't need money, she needed the truth to be heard. She signed the affidavit slowly, carefully, with Michael and Lisa both watching. The lawyers reviewed every line, ensuring the language was clear, factual, and legally sound. Once notarized, the document was sealed and stored securely. It was a quiet moment, but a powerful one. Iris wasn't just telling her story, she was swearing it into the record. That same week, I met with Donald Rubin at his office in the district attorney's building. He'd been reviewing everything I sent him and had finally decided to open a formal inquiry. His focus, for now, would be specifically on the evidence tampering in my daughter's drunk driving case. He explained that starting with one concrete crime gave him legal standing to dig deeper. His careful, methodical approach might actually succeed where my grief and outrage had only hit walls. Donald showed me the paperwork he was filing to request the chain of custody logs from the police department. The formal legal request included a confidentiality clause, and he filed a notice that barred anyone from alerting the governor's team. Unlike when I'd tried calling on my own, the department couldn't ignore an official request from the DA's office. The system was finally moving, not because I'd shouted loud enough, but because we were using the right procedures. Then Donald turned to the bribery evidence. Among the evidence Donald reviewed were the 2 video files, both shot with movie-quality clarity. The first showed Governor Johnson inside a hotel suite, accepting a thick envelope of cash, payment for vetoing a bill that benefited the other people in the room. The second, filmed months later in a different hotel room, captured him again, this time seated with executives from a major construction firm. Another payoff. Another deal. This time, the exchange secured a multi-million-dollar state contract. There was no audio, which made the footage vulnerable to spin. Without sound, the governor's team could claim it was a routine meeting, a donation, or even a staged smear. But visually, the footage was damning, clear gestures, exchanged envelopes, and expressions that didn't look innocent. Donald knew the videos alone wouldn't be enough. But paired with the memo from Caroline Vega, the Shell Company payment records, and the mounting pressure from the baby scandal, we had something powerful: timing. The element of surprise. While the governor scrambled to contain the fallout from Iris's affidavit and the DNA test, we were preparing to hit him from another angle, one he hadn't seen coming. 3 days later, Caroline Vega was at her desk when her assistant knocked, saying IT needed her approval for routine maintenance. Caroline signed the form absent-mindedly, barely glancing at it. But the tech lingered, casually mentioning a legal hold had been placed on all emails related to Governor Johnson's family. Caroline's face drained of color. She immediately grabbed her phone, scrolling through her calendar and deleting entries tied to the so-called legacy review meetings. Then she opened her inbox and began frantically selecting messages to purge. But when she hit delete, a warning flashed across the screen. These items are subject to legal preservation requirements. The tech stood silently, watching her try to destroy evidence. Caroline snapped at him to override the system. He shook his head and said any attempt to bypass the hold would be reported directly to the DA's office. Caroline slammed her laptop shut and ordered him out. But it was too late. The system had already logged every deletion attempt, complete with timestamps and her user ID. By the next morning, Donald Rubin had the deletion logs in hand. The IT department had flagged Caroline Vega's activity immediately, forwarding the report to the DA's office under the legal hold protocol. Every deletion attempt was timestamped, tied to her user ID, and cross-referenced with the legacy review calendar entries. Donald didn't waste time. He filed a motion to preserve all remaining communications and requested emergency access to Vega's archived emails. The attempted purge gave him leverage, proof of intent to destroy evidence tied to an active inquiry. It wasn't just obstruction. It was panicking. Meanwhile, Lisa was already preparing the legacy review timeline for publication. She worked late into the night, surrounded by stacks of memos, emails, and leaked documents. Her screen glowed with spreadsheets cross-referencing payment, logs against police reports, and internal communications from Governor Johnson's office. The pattern was undeniable. Each time Nathan got into trouble, DUIs, assault allegations, vandalism, there was a corresponding entry in the legacy review. Payments were issued within 24 to 48 hours, often labeled as community outreach or legal support. The charges themselves either vanished or were quietly reduced to fines and community service. One night he'd been arrested for public intoxication and resisting arrest. By morning, the charge had been downgraded to a noise violation, and a $15,000 payment had been logged to a third-party nonprofit with ties to the governor's office. Lisa highlighted each incident, matching it to the payment trail. The legacy review wasn't just a ledger, it was a map of protection. Then came the entry tied to Iris. A lump sum payment, labeled Family Support Disbursement, appeared 2 weeks after she agreed to name Nathan as the father. The amount was substantial, and the timing aligned perfectly with the pressure campaign she'd described in her affidavit. It wasn't support, it was silence money. Lisa leaned back, eyes scanning the timeline she'd built. The governor's office hadn't just protected Nathan. They'd built an entire infrastructure to sanitize his record, shield him from consequences, and bury the truth about Lena's paternity. We knew Vega's team would try to spin the deletion attempt as a misunderstanding, a routine cleanup, anything but what it really was. But the timing was too perfect, the pattern too clear. And with the affidavit signed, the DNA test underway, and the bribery videos quietly circulating through legal channels, the walls around Governor Johnson were starting to buckle. Meanwhile, Donald interviewed the evidence clerk who had handled my daughter's blood samples and paperwork. She fidgeted with her coffee cup as she spoke, saying her supervisor had called her multiple times about that specific case. It was unusual, since supervisors rarely got involved in routine DUI evidence processing. She also mentioned the evidence being marked for expedited testing, even though there was no rush order in the file. The cracks in their wall were finally showing. That same week, Child Protective Services assigned Marisol Grant to evaluate Lena's living situation. With over 20 years of experience, Marisol had a reputation for being thorough but fair. She called Iris directly, explaining that in high-profile cases, a home assessment was standard procedure. She made it clear she wasn't interested in politics. Her only concern was the child's safety. Marisol scheduled the visit for the following Tuesday. She explained she'd need to see Lena's room, check food supplies, observe interactions, and review medical records. Iris agreed immediately, her voice steady but relieved. For the first time in a long while, someone official was showing up for the right reasons. At the same time, Lisa was digging into the NDAs the former governor's family had used to silence people. She had a friend in contract law review the documents off the record. He pointed out several clauses that were legally unenforceable, especially the ones demanding silence about criminal activity. Legally, no one could be bound to conceal evidence of a crime. When Lisa explained this to Iris, the relief in her voice was unmistakable. For years, she'd lived in fear, terrified that speaking out would mean losing financial support or facing retaliation. Now she understood that any attempt to enforce those NDAs would collapse in court. The truth wasn't just morally right, it was legally protected. The next day, we met in a quiet conference room at Michael Harrington's office to coordinate our next steps. Iris brought her attorney, calm and sharp-eyed. I brought Rachel, who sat beside me like a steady anchor. For 2 hours, we spread out documents across the table, affidavits, payment logs, emails, DNA results, and the legacy review timeline. Lisa had color-coded the entries, and Donald Rubin's inquiry gave us a legal backbone. Everyone agreed, the paternity revelation had to come first. It was already half public, and the DNA results were indisputable. The test confirmed Nathan was either the father or his half-sibling. There was no way to spin it clean. The corruption and cover-up evidence would follow, anchored by Donald's formal investigation. The bribery videos, the NDAs, the shell company payments, they would land harder once the public understood what the governor's family had been hiding and why. But this wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about protecting Lena from media vultures, political retaliation, and the legacy of lies she'd been born into. We weren't just building a case. We were building a shield. The DNA test results came back late Thursday afternoon. Triple verified by an independent lab under strict chain of custody protocols overseen by Michael Harrington's office. The report was airtight. Nathan was 0% related to Lena, and Governor Johnson was 99.99% the biological father. It was the kind of truth that couldn't be spun, except, of course, the governor tried. The next morning, he held a press conference in front of the State House, flanked by his legal team and communications director. Cameras flashed as he stepped up to the podium with the same polished calm he'd used for years to deflect scandal. He claimed the test had been tampered with. "If I were the father," he said, "then my son would be the brother." That's not what the results show. Clearly, something is wrong. Reporters pressed hard. How could the test be tampered with? Why would Iris lie? Is the governor prepared to take responsibility? But the answers were vague, evasive. Beside him, Eleanor Johnson stood silent, her expression unreadable. The conference ended early, leaving the public with more questions than answers. At 2:03 a.m., a video appeared on Eleanor Johnson's Facebook page. It was a posted recording, filmed earlier that night in her kitchen. The camera wobbled slightly, the lighting dim, and Eleanor was visibly intoxicated, sipping from a half-empty glass of wine. "My husband never stopped sleeping around," she began, her voice slurred but steady enough to cut through. "Even when we were supposed to be rebuilding, and in 2001, I was lonely. He was gone most nights, campaigning, shaking hands, smiling for everyone but me." She paused, staring into the lens, her eyes glassy. "That's when I met Daniel Reyes. He saw me. He listened to me, he found me interesting, he laughed at my jokes. That's when I made the biggest mistake of my life." She took another long sip of wine, her hand trembling slightly as she set the glass back down. "I crossed a line I can never uncross. I told myself it was just one night, that it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than I ever wanted to admit." Her voice cracked as she took another sip. "I didn't tell him. I thought it would go away. I thought we could move on." The video ended abruptly after 6 minutes. By sunrise, it had been deleted from her page, but not before it was downloaded, screen-recorded, and shared across every major platform. Within hours, clips were circulating on news broadcasts, political blogs, and social media feeds. Eleanor's confession didn't just confirm the DNA results, it tore apart the carefully constructed image of loyalty and control that had shielded Governor Johnson for decades. The scandal was no longer just about paternity. It was about betrayal, manipulation, and the private fractures of a family that had ruled the public stage. And now, the truth was out, messy, unfiltered, and impossible to bury. By morning, it was gone from her page, but not from the internet. Viewers had already downloaded and screen-recorded it. Clips spread across social media, news outlets, and political blogs like wildfire. Eleanor's confession didn't just confirm the DNA results, it shattered the carefully curated image of unity and control the governor had spent years cultivating. The scandal was no longer just about paternity. It was about betrayal, manipulation, and the quiet desperation behind closed doors. And now, the truth was out and censored, unfiltered, and impossible to bury. The next morning, Donald's investigator called with a breakthrough. Subpoenaed phone records showed the former governor's personal lawyer had called the evidence clerk 14 times in the 2 weeks before my daughter's trial. The timeline was damning. A 43-minute call on the same day blood alcohol results were processed, another just an hour before the security footage was suddenly deemed corrupted and inadmissible. The pattern was undeniable. Donald wasn't chasing shadows anymore. He was building a real case, brick by brick, with proof of interference in the justice system. That same afternoon, the former governor's lawyers struck back. They filed an emergency motion in court to block any publication about Lena's paternity, arguing it would harm a minor and violate privacy rights. The filing was as thick as a phone book, packed with legalese about defamation and emotional distress. A judge set an expedited hearing for the following week, and suddenly, everyone was scrambling. Lisa's paper mobilized its full legal department. The next afternoon, Marisol Grant knocked on Iris's door. She arrived with a clipboard and a smile that felt surprisingly genuine. For the next 2 hours, Marisol observed quietly, watching Lena toddle around the living room, proudly presenting each stuffed animal for inspection while Iris answered questions about routines, doctor visits, and preschool plans. The apartment was small but spotless. Crayon drawings covered the walls, and the fridge was neatly stocked with fruit, vegetables, and juice boxes. Lena seemed happy, secure, completely unaware of the storm swirling outside. When Marisol finished her inspection, she sat down with Iris and explained her recommendation, a protective order barring Governor Johnson's family from any unsupervised contact with Lena. Iris's eyes filled with tears as she signed the paperwork. In the corner, Lena stacked blocks, oblivious to the quiet battle being fought to protect her future. Before leaving, Marisol handed Iris her direct number and promised to check in personally. It wasn't just procedure anymore, it was care. Then the former governor family hit me where it hurt most, my livelihood. My manager called to tell me my position was being eliminated as part of restructuring. His voice trembled with discomfort, but I could tell he was reading from a script. I'd seen job postings online for the exact position hours earlier. At the store, he avoided eye contact while I cleaned out my locker under the watchful eye of a security guard, as though I might steal after 2 years of loyal work. On my way out, I noticed they'd already printed new schedules with my replacement's name covering all my shifts. I couldn't sleep that night. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. So I went for a drive, with no destination, just movement. I turned onto 5th Street, headlights cutting through the quiet, and that's when I saw him. Nathan. He was sitting on the curb beside his car, laughing with a police officer like they were old friends. His posture was loose, his speech slurred. Even from a distance I could tell he was intoxicated. The officer leaned against the cruiser, arms crossed, nodding along as Nathan rambled. No breathalyzer. No handcuffs. Just a phone in Nathan's hand. I didn't stop. I kept driving, heart pounding, mind racing. By morning, I filed a public records request for the footage. Thanks to Donald Rubin pulling quiet strings behind the scenes, I had the unedited body cam video in 3 days instead of weeks. It showed everything. Nathan swerving across lanes. The officer pulling him over. Nathan stumbling out of the car, unable to stand straight, slurring excuses about being just tired. The officer recognized him immediately. Instead of following protocol, he let Nathan call someone to pick him up. For 20 minutes, Nathan sat on the curb, chuckling, while the cop chatted about football. No citation. No arrest. No accountability. The timestamp on the footage hit me like a punch. It was the same night Governor Johnson appeared on television, pleading for privacy and claiming his family was suffering too. Watching Nathan laugh with an officer while my daughter lay in the ground made my hands tremble with rage. The system hadn't just failed, it had chosen who to protect. And it wasn't us. The hearing day arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the benches, lawyers filled every row, and tension hung in the air like static. The former governor's legal team argued that publishing the story would cause irreparable harm to an innocent child. They leaned hard on privacy, on reputation, on the idea that Lena deserved protection from public scrutiny. But Michael Harrington countered with quiet force. The public, he said, had a right to know about the corruption, the abuse of power, the systems built to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. After 2 hours of legal arguments, the judge's ruling landed like a split decision. He allowed the paternity story to run, citing its partial exposure and the DNA results already in circulation. But he held off on the corruption allegations, pending further review. It wasn't a total victory, but it was enough. The first article could publish. And behind the scenes, Caroline Vega finally cracked. Cornered by mounting evidence, she admitted to Lisa that she had tried to purge the City Hall calendar, wiping references to NDAs, hush money payments, and internal memos tied to the Legacy Review. She spun it as a misguided attempt to protect privacy, but no one was buying it. Her survival instincts had long since drowned out any loyalty to Governor Johnson. The walls were closing in. And for the first time, the truth had legal permission to step into the light. The next morning, the newspaper's website crashed under the weight of traffic when the first article went live. The headline was clinical, not sensational, former governor's secret daughter. Beneath it were DNA reports, signed NDAs, and most damning of all, a timeline that exposed years of coordinated silence and protection. By noon, the site was back online. From Rachel's apartment, I watched the fallout unfold in real time. Protesters gathered outside City Hall, their chants rising like a wave. Signs bearing my daughter's face were lifted over the crowd, some with her name, others with the word justice scrawled in bold red letters. Governor Johnson canceled all public appearances, retreating behind vague statements about family matters and respecting privacy. But the public wasn't buying it anymore. The silence that once insulated him now felt like guilt. The polished calm he'd used for years had curdled into cowardice. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a reckoning. Donald called that afternoon with news. A grand jury investigation had been authorized into obstruction of justice and official misconduct. He couldn't name Governor Johnson yet, but everyone knew who the real target was. Days later, Iris texted me a photo of her protective order, supervised visits only, mandatory counseling, every safeguard spelled out in black and white. She had taken control of her own life. But the counterattack came fast. A process server showed up at Rachel's door with a lawsuit thick as a phone book. The former governor's lawyers were suing me and the newspaper for millions in defamation damages. It wasn't about justice. It was designed to bleed us dry, to intimidate us into silence, and to remind us how far power would go to protect itself. 3 weeks after the grand jury convened, subpoenas landed on the desks of a dozen police supervisors and members of the former governor's legal team. At last, the legal machine was grinding forward. I prepared my own testimony with painstaking care, reviewing every note, every timestamp, making sure the evidence was airtight. Meanwhile, Nathan unraveled. He skipped mandatory alcohol counseling, and a judge finally threw him into county jail for 30 days. Watching him cuffed in court wasn't satisfying, it was just sad. A wasted life, shielded too long by privilege. That same week, my lawyer laid out our next move, a civil wrongful death suit. It would force discovery of every buried piece of evidence from my daughter's case. Filing that paperwork felt like keeping the promise I'd made at her funeral to fight for the truth we had been denied. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with reporters, lawyers, and quiet onlookers who wanted to see the truth dragged into the light. One by one, witnesses took the stand. First came the evidence clerk. She described how supervisors had ordered her to adjust chain of custody logs in my daughter's case, making it look as though key files had never gone missing. Her testimony matched my timeline exactly. Then a retired detective stepped forward. He admitted he'd been pressured to drop charges against Nathan more than once, told bluntly that pursuing it would end his career. His voice shook as he said it, but the relief in his face was unmistakable. A city attorney followed, testifying that he had been instructed to quietly settle cases whenever certain families were involved. He explained how payouts were disguised as community grants or legal fees, all to keep Nathan's name out of the record. Each witness told a different piece of the same story. There was an unspoken rule. If Nathan Johnson was pulled over, arrested, or caught in trouble, the job wasn't to enforce the law, it was to protect him. Do everything possible to prevent an arrest. Help him. Cover for him. And if anyone resisted, the governor's staff made sure they understood the consequences. Careers ruined. Families threatened. Silence fought. The judge listened, stone-faced, as the testimonies stacked up like bricks in a wall closing around the former governor's legacy. By the end of the week, the pattern was undeniable. Nathan hadn't just been lucky. He had been shielded, deliberately, systematically, and at the expense of everyone else's justice. The grand jury would take months, Donald warned, but they were working on the case. For the first time, the system felt like it was moving toward accountability instead of burying the truth. At the 6-month mark, I stood at the same crosswalk, recording a statement for the civil case. Saying my daughter's name into the camera for the legal record didn't bring her back, but it felt like a small piece of justice. Life settled into a rhythm. I worked at a nonprofit helping crime victims navigate the courts. While discovery in the lawsuit kept unearthing evidence, one revelation changed everything. The leaked files had originated from an intern in Caroline Vega's office. She had dated Nathan Johnson, and after their relationship ended badly, she initially leaked documents to embarrass him. But as she dug deeper, what she found disturbed her. She came forward, and in exchange for full testimony, was granted immunity. Her account matched our timeline perfectly. Then came the bombshell. A folder labeled blackmail was uncovered on Caroline Vega's personal laptop. Inside were videos, recorded by Governor Johnson himself, used to pressure officials, silence dissent. Faced with mounting evidence, Caroline Vega took a plea deal, 2 years of house arrest and 2 years probation. Each revelation only strengthened our case. The walls weren't just cracking, they were collapsing. Meanwhile, Iris was granted child support and finally moved back to her home state. She enrolled in a teacher's program, determined to build a stable future for Lena. For the first time in years, she was living on her own terms. The criminal case reached its climax soon after. The former governor was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. But just 2 weeks into his sentence, he was granted a full pardon by President Trump. The backlash was immediate. 5 judges abruptly resigned to avoid prosecution themselves as investigators began circling around their own roles in shielding the governor's family. The fallout tore through his family. The governor divorced Eleanor, their marriage collapsing under the weight of betrayal and exposure. And Nathan, who had truly believed he was Lena's father, was left shattered. His father had used him, his mother had lied to him, and the truth had destroyed him. He entered rehab, broken and adrift. As for me, I won my civil suit. The judgment awarded me $5 million, money I used to start a nonprofit dedicated to victims' rights and accountability. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was real change carved from tragedy. My daughter's death would not fade into silence. And maybe, just maybe, that was only the beginning. I promised my daughter her story wouldn't fade into silence. Telling it here is part of keeping that promise. This story showed how power protects itself, but it also showed how truth can break through. Have you ever seen corruption up close or felt the system was stacked against you? Share your experience below, because the more we speak, the harder it is for them to bury the truth.